well today I thought I would film for you all my labour and delivery story with my second little boy. As you all know, I already have one son before him, and I'm now a mum of 2 boys. I decided that I would film this for you before I forget all of the gory details and everything that happened, so I could really remember it and give you a really up-to-date and accurate version of what happened. So I'm going to jump right in. I think I'll start from the week before I turned 37 weeks pregnant. When I was 36 plus 5, my little boy decided that he was going to turn around inside me after being engaged the whole time of my pregnancy and being head down. And when I went in for my 37-week appointment into the hospital to discuss delivery options with my consultant, I was told that he had gone breech. Now for me, I was so upset, so traumatised, because going breech was just something that I really didn't want, because it would ultimately mean, hypothetically, if he didn't turn back round, a C-section. Now, many of you may or may not know that I also had a broken foot and still have a broken foot at the moment. So because of that, having a broken foot plus having a toddler to run around after, a 2.5-year-old, plus having to have a C-section was just kind of my worst fear, and I really didn't want that to happen. On the Friday, we were booked in for an ECV, which I was absolutely dreading. I don't believe in, if I can avoid it, other kind of things getting involved to help. Sorry, he's right next to me. I don't believe in other medical causes to get involved, so I really didn't want it, and I'd read a lot of bad things about it and then a lot of good things, and one of the biggest concerns was that even if it did all work, he could just turn back round. Because of the dangers of it, it could affect both me and the baby, so I had to have all my hospital bags packed because there could still be a risk that we would have to have a C-section after this procedure had happened. However, on the day in between my appointment, I was doing all the things that you can think of to get the baby turning back round again. I was upside down on the sofas and everything like that, and I was sure I felt him turn back round, and I'm sure I felt my tummy and I could feel him as if he turned back round. And I was right. When I went in for my appointment to have the ECV done, he had turned back round. And from that point on, I made a pact that because he was the right way, I would do everything I could to keep him around the right way, which meant bouncing on birthing balls instead of sitting on the sofa and bits and bobs like that. So fast forward a week exactly, the following Thursday, I was exactly 38 weeks, and it was the 8th of June, and I went into hospital with the reduced movements that I mentioned. When we went up there, I had my hospital bag from obviously the week before, and when we went up there, before we even kind of had any machines hooked up to me, as soon as we were seen, the midwife said to me, who was caring for us, before we go anywhere, I just want to let you know that we will be inducing you. The doctor's really busy and she's up here at the moment, and so we might as well just notify her so she can move you onto the ward, but we will be inducing you. Well, mine and my husband's faces must have been a picture, and I kind of wish I'd been filming the moment had I known it was going to happen. We were not expecting to be induced at all. Again, it was another thing that I really wanted to avoid, as I did have a natural delivery with my first son, and the idea of being induced, I'd heard so many negative things, so many horror stories, so many of them ending in C-sections, that for me it just wasn't ideal and it wasn't what I wanted. So we had all the monitors hooked up to me, and they obviously monitored the baby and things like that, and they noticed that I was having regular contractions. So at this point, it was all looking good to potentially that I could go into labour naturally. Now with my first, I actually went into labour at 39 weeks, or the day before, and I had him at 39 weeks exactly. So it wasn't necessarily out of the question that I would have my second early, and so being just 38 weeks, that was definitely a possibility, because they do say they can come a little bit earlier, each child that you have. So I was definitely hoping that that was kind of what was going on. I was moved over to one of the wards, where obviously you stay on that ward until you're ready to deliver. And because of complications with my first and the complications in this pregnancy, just due to it being my third lot of reduced movements, which is why they induced me in the first place, I would be going straight to the delivery suite when it was time to deliver. I wasn't given any options at birthing suites. And to be honest with you, with my first experience with my first son, I'm so glad we was in the delivery suite. I couldn't fault them, so I'm was so glad, and I was really happy to kind of go back on a delivery suite, just knowing that the safety of the doctors and the resus machines and everything like that really puts me at ease on those wards. So we've moved over. I was monitored for the rest of the evening, and for the rest of the evening my contractions continued to come very regularly, and so it was all looking good, and I was told to try and have a rest. Well, I managed to get a couple of hours sleep, and when I woke up in the morning I was still suffering quite badly with the contractions, but they'd kind of eased off a little and they weren't feeling and coming as regular as what they were the night before, and they weren't as tight or as painful. When I was then assessed at 11 o'clock in the morning, I was put back up onto the machine and the contractions had completely disappeared. They weren't there, and if they were there, they were kind of coming so sporadic, they weren't regular. So the midwives were putting it down to just really regular Braxton Hicks, or being in kind of like the preterm labour side of things. So I was then advised that I was going to have the pessary. Now the pessary is quite literally that. It's a pessary hormone drug that literally gets popped inside, and it literally sends out hormones to your body to kickstart those contractions and get them working. That was put in around 11 o'clock, and I was advised that has to stay in for 24 hours, and they wouldn't check me unless they absolutely had to, whether it be because the situation was moving forward or if there was another problem or anything like that. And they would also regularly monitor baby's movements and my heart and blood pressure and things like that. So I remember that not long after that, the contractions really started to kick up a notch, and they really started to come quite regularly, to the point they got down to about 40 seconds, but they were about 4 to 5 minutes apart. So they weren't coming as long as they would like, and they also weren't coming as regular as what they would consider to actually be established labour and contractions that were going to stay. And I remember being in a lot of pain for them. I was given some paracetamol, and I think I had something else as well, another type of tablet-y form thing, codeine or something like that, and I was given some tablets, and that helped with the pain a little bit, and then it carried on and it got really bad, and it was really horrendous. And then I remember that not long after taking those tablets, all of the contractions that I was having and all the pain just seemed to ease off. Now at first I was putting it down to the tablets doing their job and working, but they had in the end completely disappeared, and when I was hooked up to the machine they were kind of drifting off and fading off. I was trying to be as active as possible during this stage, because obviously what I really wanted to encourage from what the midwives were saying was obviously the baby kind of moving down into my birth canal, going as low as possible, and obviously putting pressure on my cervix to kind of open me up and get me dilated. That was kind of what we really wanted. However, that just wasn't happening, and they eventually died off, like I mentioned, and I was absolutely gutted. I had been there, by the time they started to die off, it must have been about 4 or 5 o'clock, so I'd been there for a very long time. So the midwives advised that I go for a walk, which, considering I had extremely swollen feet due to my broken foot, it was a really hard task for me to do that. But off I went. We went out for a walk, and I remember we walked all the way down to the where the Costa is and where all the foods are and stuff like that, because I'm not a fan of hospital food. I grabbed myself some dinner and we walked all the way back, and by the time I'd gotten back, it must have only been about 10-15 minutes. The contractions were coming thick and fast again, and they were really painful. I managed to do another couple of hours, and I was in a lot of pain. I was reassessed, and when I was reassessed I was only 1 to 2 centimetres dilated, so I hadn't hardly progressed at all, and I was really struggling. After getting extremely emotional and getting really upset, at this point I hadn't really slept at all in almost 48 hours, because I didn't manage to get much sleep from the night before when I was actually at the hospital, because the contractions were there. I was absolutely shattered, really tired, really drained of energy. I hadn't eaten much. I was in so much pain. I was so uncomfortable. It was extremely hot in the hospital at this point. I was in a tiny little segmented room on the ward that I was on, because we was just on the early stages, or on like the ward that you go to once you've had your baby. That was the ward that we was on, and I was really struggling. So after a very emotional chat, quite a few midwives had recommended to me that I take pethidine, and for me, having any sort of drug pumped into my body other than gas and air, which is all I used in my first pregnancy and my first labour, was really kind of, it was foreign to me, and I didn't really want to do it, and it wasn't something that I'd kind of pictured. I'd kind of put in my birth plan that I didn't want any drugs, and it was just gas and air. And I remember being really pressurised in my first pregnancy and my first labour to kind of have an epidural and kind of move things along and get rid of the pain, but that wasn't what I wanted. And so after being explained the pros and cons to the pethidine, and I think at this point my husband was, I don't know how to word it, he could see that I was in so much pain and it was starting to wear him down as well, and he was being so strong for me and so supportive, but he just kind of recommended that I did take it. And he's really, really level-headed, which is what I absolutely love. And he's just one of these types of people that you just really kind of trust and you would warrant their opinion. And when he suggested to me that I have it, he kind of slowly started to bring me round. And I think everyone was in agreement now, looking back, midwives, my husband and myself, that the pethidine was definitely the right thing to do. So they reassessed me. Again, I was in the same position, same situation. The pessary was still inside me because obviously we hadn't even run 12 hours at that point. So the pethidine was still inside, the pessary was still inside me, and I was given my first pethidine dose. Now they literally just inject it up to the top of the leg, which is completely fine, but it can make you extremely drowsy. It can also make you sick, so they add an anti-sickness drug into it as well. Now that is one of the things I suffer with in labour and in pregnancies in general, is sickness. And I remember getting the injection in my leg. And once I had that done, there was another lady on my ward, and she came onto my ward that morning and into my room, and it was just a room of 2, and she just had her baby, and her baby, literally, as soon as they put the injection in me, her baby just started screaming. It hadn't cried all day long, and I was absolutely tired and shattered and drained and worn out and in so much pain. And the whole point of this pethidine was that I get some sleep, because the midwives were advising that if I didn't sleep, my body was just not going to have enough money, have enough energy to push me forward into labour to get the baby out. And obviously I was going to be stuck in this sort of position, or worse, obviously it developed into a C-section or whatever it may be. At that point, I cannot thank the midwives enough. They actually had a spare room, a whole quiet room, and they actually moved me onto this suite, into the room, and the room was humongous. It must be about as big as the room that I'm sitting in now, and it had a private bath. No, it didn't have a private bathroom, but it had like a sink and bits and bobs like that, and it was just absolutely massive. So they gave me the pethidine, and when they did that, I actually managed to get some sleep. It wasn't a very comfortable sleep. I kept waking up, and it was a very disturbed sleep. However, I did manage to get some sleep. However, I was also really, really sick. And I remember whilst I was sleeping, my husband went home to have a shower. We literally only lived about 10 minutes down the road from the hospital. So he went home, got some clothes, got some other bits I asked him to get, because this was going to be the only moment that we really had, as we just wasn't prepared to come into hospital in the first place. He went home, did what he needed to do, and whilst he was away, I'd actually thrown up. It was a bit horrendous, and I'd feel really, really sick and really, really weak, and it wasn't very nice. I then managed to get some more sleep, and then I was reassessed. And after I was reassessed, the midwife actually said to me that I was really, really dehydrated, and my pulse was really, really high. They kind of went and spoke to a doctor, and the doctor advised that it could just be from the fact that I'd thrown up, and that I just needed to make sure I was getting some fluids inside me, but I just didn't seem to be able to keep anything down. Once they had a look at my notes though, they noticed that apparently my pulse had kind of been elevated and had been around the same sort of area the whole way through my pregnancy, so they wasn't as concerned. So instead of putting me on a bag of fluids, they actually decided to leave it. At that point, I was then reassessed, and I still wasn't anywhere closer to being in an established labour. I was still around the 2 centimetre mark, but I had managed to get some sleep. And so because of that, they don't like to give you the pethidine too close to you being in labour or actually being in established labour, which is why they monitor you. But because I wasn't, they actually managed to give me another dose of pethidine, and it managed to help me sleep a little bit more. When I was next reassessed on the monitor for the baby, however, it was notified and it was coming up that I was actually overstimulating, and that I was actually taking and having too many contractions. I think I was having about 6 to 7 contractions every 10 minutes, which was way too many than what they wanted me to have. And hence why I was having so much pain when they were there. So they actually decided to take the pessary out of me because it was just overstimulating my body. They did that. I managed to get some more sleep, and when I woke up in the morning, I was reassessed. I went to the toilet first and I saw that I had a show, so I was like, okay. Mentioned this to the midwives, and then I went back onto the bed and they reassessed me. And I said to them at this point, before they did so, I said, I'm in a lot of pain, and they was reassessing me to give me more pethidine. And I said, I don't feel like like, these contractions are gonna go. These are coming too fast, too thick, they're too heavy, they're just hurting too much for them to disappear. And when they reassessed me, I was 4 centimetres. So I was officially classed as being 4 centimetres at 9:40 in the morning, and I was over the moon. I couldn't have been happier. And she said to me at that point, do you want me to give you a sweep? Which I encouraged, because obviously generally sweeps help encourage things along and kind of help the baby move down and progress even more. So I said, yeah, perfect, give me a sweep, and that's what I did. That was at 9:40, and at 10:20 I was moved around onto the ward. I just had gas and air at this point, and everything seemed to be up in the ante and getting a lot worse. And I really remember being in so much pain. I managed to get through quite a bit of it, and I think I must have been there for about another hour or so, maybe not even that long, about 40 minutes. And I remember thinking, I cannot do this. With my first, I was in labour for 11.5 hours, established labour that is, and I remember it being so painful, but not this painful until a lot further along when it was nearing the end. And so I remember thinking, I cannot be in this much pain for 11.5 hours. So I asked for the epidural, and for me, that was kind of my absolutely don't want it at all. And I remember my husband looking at me going, are you sure you want this? And I was going to him, I just cannot do this pain. This is too much for me. I cannot do this for 11.5 hours. And I could just see it all happening again. Everything that happened with my first son, and getting quite worked up. And I just wasn't down for it, because with my first son, he had shoulder dystocia. We never got skin to skin. We never had that first moment. My husband never got to cut the cord. It was a horrible way. He had the cord around his neck. He wasn't breathing. He had to be resuscitated. So I could just see it heading in that direction. I asked for the epidural, and they tried to put a catheter into my hand, but where I was so dehydrated, they were really struggling to find veins and get it in. So they called the anaesthetist, who came through. He put the catheter into my hand, and he read me through all the terms and conditions of having the epidural. I remember lying on the bed, and at this point, once he'd said to me and got me to sign all the paperwork, I remember thinking, I need to push. And she reassessed me, and at this point I was 8 centimetres dilated. So I'd literally gone in the space of an hour or so from 4 to 8 centimetres. So I was admitted at 9:40, and then I remember needing to push. I asked them to break my waters when they assessed me, which they did. So that was around 11:30. And then at 11:40 I started pushing. That was when I started pushing, and by 11:51 my baby boy was here, and he was born. And everything went perfectly after that. It couldn't have been more perfect if I tried. We had skin to skin. He was delivered straight onto my chest. My husband got to cut the cord. It was just such a magical memory, and now I understand why so many mums get so emotional about that, because for me, I didn't get that first time round, and I was in more a state of shock than that kind of emotional, loving place. As much as I loved my first son, don't get me wrong, we just never had that kind of whole dreamy experience that you pictured. So I was so happy when I got to have that with my son. He was born at 11:51, and he was 7 pounds 4 ounces. And he is literally just an absolute angel. We couldn't be happier, and I'm going to show you guys all him now. So here he is. This is my gorgeous second baby boy. His name is Parker. That's what we decided on. We have quite a common surname of Smith, as you can probably tell by my channel name, and we really wanted something different. My first son's called Klayton, and so for us we wanted something that was quite different and would kind of match up with that. So he's called Parker, and his middle names are Ross Thomas, after both our parents, and then his surname is Smith. And he was officially born on the 10th of June 2017, and we literally couldn't be happier. I'm in a little bubble. I'm so in love. He's settled into our family absolutely perfectly, and yeah, everything is just completely perfect. So I am going to be doing updates going forward. He isn't quite a newborn anymore. Filming this, he's actually 1 month, so I will also be filming soon, shortly for you, his 1 month update. And yeah, please stay tuned and look out for that. If you did like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all again shortly for another video. Bye guys.